"You can't sit here," the flight attendant's voice echoed through the first-class cabin, cutting through the air like a razor. "This seat is not for you." Alex, a boy of only 12, looked at his ticket and then at the flight attendant. His dark eyes met hers, confused, calm. "But ma'am, my ticket says 2A. "This is seat 2A, he replied politely, showing the piece of paper in his hands. The flight attendant, whose badge identified her as Mrs. Reynolds, squinted her eyes and snatched the ticket from him with a sharp movement. "There must be some mistake," she said loudly enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "How did you get a first-class ticket? Where are your parents?" The plane was almost full, and several passengers began to observe the scene. No one said anything. Some looked away, pretending to be busy with their devices. Others watched with uncomfortable curiosity, like someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Alex took a deep breath. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned his presence in places not intended for him. "My aunt bought me the ticket. She works for the airline. I'm traveling alone to visit my father in Chicago." Mrs. Reynolds examined the ticket and pressed her lips together. "Even though the ticket is valid, we can't bring children alone in first class. It's company policy." She handed the ticket back to him with a quick gesture. "He has to move to economy class right now." There was no such policy. Alex knew this because his Aunt Diane, director of operations for the airline for 15 years, had gone over the rules with him before the trip. It was his first solo flight, and she had made sure he was prepared for anything. "Excuse me, ma'am," he tried again, keeping his voice steady despite the growing lump in his throat. "I'm sure that's not company policy. My aunt—" "Listen, boy," Mrs. Reynolds interrupted, leaning closer, her strong perfume invading Alex's space. "I don't care who your aunt is. What I'm saying is you have to change seats. You're delaying boarding." A man in a suit in the next seat looked at his watch impatiently. A woman adjusted her glasses and pretended to read a magazine. No one intervened. With impressive dignity for someone so young, Alex stood up, picked up his small blue backpack, and followed the flight attendant down the aisle. He could feel the looks on his back, some of pity, some of indifference, none of anger. In economy class, Mrs. Reynolds pointed him to a seat in the middle of the plane. "Sit here and stay in your seat for the entire flight." Alex sat in silence. The seat was cramped, nothing like the spacious, first-class seat his aunt had reserved especially for him. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He waited for the flight attendant to move away before taking his phone out of his pocket. His fingers moved quickly over the screen as he typed a message to his aunt. "The flight attendant made me leave first class. They said children aren't allowed to sit there. He checked my ticket and still made the change." He hesitated a moment before adding, "I guess he didn't believe someone like me could be in first class." The answer came back almost immediately. "What is the flight number and name of the flight attendant?" Alex sent the information, including the last name that was on Mrs. Reynolds' ID card. His aunt replied with 2 words, "Don't worry." The plane was already taxiing when the cockpit phone rang. The pilot answered, his face gradually changing from neutral to concerned. After hanging up, he exchanged a few words with the co-pilot and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience, but we need to return to the gate due to an urgent operational issue. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." A murmur of frustration ran through the cabin. Executives checked their watches. Families exchanged worried glances. No one imagined that the operational issue was directly related to the child who had been moved out of first class minutes earlier. The plane stopped at the gate, and the cockpit door opened. 2 men in suits and a woman with a tablet entered. The woman scanned the passengers until she saw Alex and gestured for him to come closer. Mrs. Reynolds, who was checking the seatbelts, froze when she saw them. "Mrs. Reynolds," the woman said with calm authority, "I'm Vanessa Torres, Director of Customer Relations. We need to talk right now." Her expression left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Alex watched as the flight attendant paled and was escorted off the plane. Meanwhile, one of the men in suits approached him. "Alex, I am Mr. Patel, flight supervisor. Please get your belongings and join me." The silence in the cockpit was deafening as Alex walked down the aisle. The same passengers who had remained silent were now looking at him with expressions of shock and embarrassment. What no one on that plane could imagine was that Diane Carter was not just any director of operations. She was the regional director of compliance and security for the airline, responsible for ensuring that all protocols were followed to the letter and had zero tolerance for discrimination. When her nephew sent that message, a storm broke out that not even Mrs. Reynolds, with her 12 years of experience, could have foreseen. And this was not just any flight. On board was an entourage of executives from the airline itself attending a conference on inclusion and diversity in the aviation industry. The irony would be almost comical if it weren't so devastating for Mrs. Reynolds' career. If this story of prejudice and justice has touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel to discover how a simple act of discrimination triggered a profound transformation, not only in Alex's life, but in an entire sector that had long needed to confront its own prejudices. Alex followed Mr. Patel down the silent airport corridor. Through the glass panels, the morning sun illuminated the planes lined up on the runway, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded here. Mr. Patel indicated opening the door to a meeting room. Diane Carter immediately stood up when she saw her nephew. Her eyes scrutinized Alex with concern as she hugged him briefly. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Are you okay?" Alex replied simply. Diane turned to Mr. Patel. "How is the situation on the plane?" "Ms. Torres is interviewing Ms. Reynolds. The passengers are still on board." With the methodical calm that had made her the regional director of compliance, Diane asked Alex for a report. He described every detail. The flight attendant approached him without provocation, questioned his ticket, made up a non-existent policy, and made him walk the entire aisle to coach. A tall man with a tablet walked calmly into the room, typing while Alex spoke. "This is Raphael, our director of public relations," Diane explained. When Alex finished his report, Diane crossed her arms. "You have the two options. You can reboard, or we can reschedule for tomorrow. I want to continue today." Alex decided, "I have done nothing wrong. Why should I change my plans?" Meanwhile, in a separate room, Ms. Reynolds sat stiffly across from Vanessa Torres. "Are you aware of the rules regarding minors in first class?" Vanessa asked. "Yes, of course," Ms. Reynolds replied with false confidence. "And what is that policy?" The commissioner hesitated. "Unaccompanied minors are usually left behind for safety reasons." "There's no such policy, Mrs. Reynolds," Vanessa interrupted, placing a handbook on the table. "Children 5 and older can sit in any class for which they have a valid ticket. It's on page 43 of the handbook you swore you knew when you were hired 12 years ago." In the conference room, Raphael was showing Alex something on his tablet. "It's the new diversity policy that was being introduced at the Chicago conference. Ironic, right?" Diane scrolled over to an airplane security video. Even without sound, it was clear. Mrs. Reynolds walked over to Alex, checked his ticket, and handed it back. Even more revealing, 2 white children sitting alone in first class a few rows ahead of them, whom LaFata completely ignored. "They're Hassan and Emma Miller," Diane explained. "They travel alone in first class, just like you." Mr. Patel returned with some disturbing news. Mrs. Reynolds alleges that Alex was disrespectful, that he challenged her before other passengers boarded. Alex protested. "That's not true. We know that." She reassured him. Diane is trying to turn him into his word against the word of a 12-year-old boy, but we have more than the video. Raphael showed a private social media group for the company. There was Mrs. Reynolds commenting over the years about passengers who didn't look like they belonged in first class and how she maintained standards. There were photos discreetly taken, derogatory comments, an undeniable pattern of prejudice. "You weren't the first, Alex," Diane said quietly, "but perhaps you can help make you the last." The phone rang. Diane quickly answered it. "The general manager has just been made aware of the incident," she reported after hanging up. "They want an immediate resolution." That's when Alex had an idea. He sat up straighter, his eyes shining with a new purpose. Instead of trying to hide what happened, we used it as a real-life example in the conference, a case study of how prejudice occurs in practice. There was a shocked silence in the room. Then slowly a smile spread across Raphael's face. "Brilliant, Bah," he murmured. "Absolutely brilliant." What Mrs. Reynolds could never have imagined when she pulled that black boy from first class in was that it wasn't just that he had powerful connections. It was that while she fought to save her career in an interrogation room, a quiet revolution was being planned, not by executives or advisors, but by a 12-year-old boy who just an hour earlier had been forced to walk down the aisle while adults looked on impassively and chose silence. Alex's plan wasn't just seeking personal revenge. In his young hands, they were making something far more powerful. The opportunity to turn their humiliation into a catalyst for change that would reach far beyond that plane, a choice the airline and all its employees would never forget. 3 hours later, Flight 718 bound for Chicago finally took off. Alex was back in first class, seat 2A, but it wasn't the same plane. The airline had changed the entire plane and assigned a new crew after the incident. The only person who remained on board from the original party was Mr. Patel, who now personally oversaw the service at airline headquarters. An emergency meeting was being held on the 32nd floor. The conference room was packed with tense executives and lawyers. Worried public relations directors were hastily crafting damage containment strategies. "The situation is serious," announced Jonathan Morris, the company's chief executive. "We've received a call from the governor's office. The story is already circulating on social media." In the center of the table, a tablet was displaying the first leaked video recorded by a first-class passenger. It showed Mrs. Reynolds confronting Alex, checking his ticket, and escorting him to the back of the plane. Even more seriously, it clearly showed the white children sitting a few rows ahead, completely ignored by the same flight attendant. "Where is Mrs. Reynolds now?" asked an executive. "In a separate room with human resources and legal representatives," Mr. Morris replied. "She's not taking the situation well." In a small meeting room 2 floors below, Mrs. Reynolds sat stiffly, her fingers nervously tapping on the table. Her initial confidence had completely evaporated. "Do you understand the seriousness of the situation?" the human resources representative asked for the third time. "Was it a misunderstanding?" Mrs. Reynolds insisted, her voice bordering on despair. "I was only following what I believed to be the protocol. That boy didn't look like he belonged there." She stopped abruptly. "Didn't he look like," the company lawyer asked, leaning forward. "Didn't he look like he belonged in first class? What exactly was that based on?" Her cell phone vibrated, a message from another flight attendant. "You are everywhere. The video is going viral." "What did you do?" With trembling hands, Mrs. Reynolds opened the link that had been sent to her. It was a live report. Raphael, the company's director of public relations, was with Diane Carter, and to his utter horror, the CEO, Jonathan Morris. "We are deeply appalled by the incident that occurred today on our flight," Morris declared to the cameras. "Discrimination has no place in our company. We have already initiated a full investigation and will take all necessary measures." Ms. Reynolds felt her blood run cold as the camera cut to an interview with Diane Carter, identified in the caption as the Regional Director of Compliance and Security. "What was most alarming," Diane explained, "is that this was not an isolated incident. Our preliminary investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior that went unnoticed for too long." The camera then showed enlarged screenshots of posts from a private staff group where Ms. Reynolds had shared disparaging remarks about passengers over the years. All her messages, her secret photos, her comments about maintaining first-class standards, exposed for the world to see. "How did you do it?" whispered to the HR representative. "Anonymous reports from colleagues," he replied. "Apparently you weren't as discreet as you thought." Back in the conference room on the 32nd floor, the marketing director was showing the presentation that would be used at the Chicago conference, now completely touched up thanks to Alex's suggestion. "Instead of just slides on diversity and inclusion, we'll start with an actual case study," he explained. "We'll show how unconscious bias manifests itself in our daily service, using today's incident as a lesson." The screen displayed a simple title, Case 718, How We Speak to Our Customers Without Realizing It. "It was the guy's idea," added Raphael, impressed. "We decided to use the incident itself as a catalyst for real change." On the plane, Alex looked out the window at the passing clouds. Unlike Ms. Reynolds, he was not satisfied to see someone lose their job. He did not want that. What he wanted was much deeper, that no one else go through the same thing as him. His phone vibrated with a message from his aunt. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," he answered. "What's going to happen to her?" The reply took a few seconds. "She won't work with us again, but the most important thing is what's happening now. Thanks to you, we've already received messages from other airlines who want to know about our new training program. The president of the Travel Association wants to talk about industry standards. Alex smiled slightly. He wasn't looking for revenge, but for transformation. In the conference room on the second floor, Ms. Reynolds was faced with the reality that she had built for herself. Her words and actions did not exist in a vacuum. They reflected deep-rooted prejudices that were now open for all to see. Her world was falling apart, not because a boy had a powerful aunt, but because she had repeatedly chosen to judge people by their appearance. And she had finally found someone who wouldn't stay silent. "You don't understand," she tried one last time. "I was just trying to do my job." "No, Mrs. Reynolds," the lawyer replied, closing the file in front of his job was to ensure respectful and equitable service for all passengers. From what we're seeing, that's the one aspect of his job he's consistently failed to deliver. What began as a humiliation for a 12-year-old boy had become a moment of reckoning for an entire industry. Meanwhile, at 30,000 feet in the air, Alex had no idea of the revolution his quiet dignity had ignited and how his name would be remembered in training halls and aviation manuals for years to come. Not as a victim, but as the catalyst for long-needed change. It had been 6 months since the Flight 718 incident. In a packed auditorium at airline headquarters, Alex sat front row, watching a presentation he had never imagined would exist. Alex Protocol, Advanced Diversity and Inclusion Training for Aircrew. On the giant screens, video of the incident had become mandatory educational material, not to humiliate, but to transform. Alex's name now symbolized fundamental change in the aviation industry. "We are honored to have with us the young man who inspired this initiative," announced CEO Jonathan Morris, Alex Carter, whose name now baptizes our national formation. When Alex took the stage to give a short speech, his eyes searched for his Aunt Diane in the audience. She was smiling proudly. The tears she had held back that day on the plane were now shining in her eyes for a completely different reason. "I'm not here because I want anyone to be punished," she said into the microphone in a young but firm voice. "I'm here because I want everyone to be seen, to be truly seen." Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, Mrs. Reynolds turned off the television that was showing a report on the new airline industry policy. Her life had quickly fallen apart after the incident, the viral video, the testimonies of other passengers, her positions exposed. All of this had made it impossible for her to get another job in aviation. The discrimination she had practiced for years without consequences had cost her not only her job but her entire professional identity. The same colleagues who used to agree with her observations in private groups were now pretending not to know her. A notification appeared on her phone. Another rejected interview. "We regret to inform you that your profile does not correspond with our current corporate values." Back at the airline, a quiet revolution was underway. The incident with Alex had opened the floodgates to hundreds of similar complaints that for years had been ignored or downplayed as misunderstandings. The difference was that now they were being heard. "What impresses me most," Raphael commented during an evaluation meeting, "is that we have managed to implement changes that had been put on hold for years, and all because a 12-year-old boy remained calm and used the system against himself." Diane smiled. Not against himself, to correct himself, against the system. The story spread quickly. The boy who had previously only been known for being a quiet student was now seen as someone who challenged an entire system without raising his voice. He wasn't seeking fame, but when he got it, he decided to use it for a purpose. When a youth magazine asked him for an interview, he accepted on one condition: that they not only talk about him, but about all the children who face prejudice every day. "How did you feel when they sent you to the back of the plane?" the journalist asked. Alex thought for a moment. "It wasn't the first time that someone had decided where I should or shouldn't be without knowing me, but it was the first time that I was able to prove that the problem wasn't my seat, but the limited vision of whoever decided where my seat should be." The Flight 718 incident has become required reading in flight schools and corporate training programs. Alex's approach, using evidence, maintaining dignity, and turning outrage into constructive action, was documented in an entire chapter of the company's new procedures manual. The next time he flew, Alex was personally greeted by the captain, who introduced himself and asked to have his picture taken with him. "My son is in the new training. He saw his video and said he wants to be a pilot. We can make sure everyone is treated with respect on board. Mrs. Reynolds, for her part, eventually found a job at a small grocery store. One day, while she was organizing shelves, she recognized a customer, the woman who had been sitting next to Alex on that fateful flight and hadn't said a word. "I know you," the woman said hesitantly. "Madam?" Reynolds nodded, expecting another public rebuke. Instead, the woman said quietly, "I failed that day, too. I didn't speak up when I should have." She paused. "I think we're all learning." This was the closest thing to redemption that Mrs. Reynolds ever got. Not immediate forgiveness, but the possibility that maybe she too could change. A year after the incident, Alex was invited to speak at a national conference on civil rights and education. At the end of his speech, he shared the most important lesson he'd learned. When we face injustice, we have choices. We can stay silent, we can scream in rage, or we can find our most powerful voice, the one that speaks with such truth that it's impossible not to be heard. What I've discovered is that when you refuse to be less than you are, the world eventually conforms to your greatness. In the auditorium, every airline in the country was represented. The system that once allowed a child to be publicly humiliated now bowed to the wisdom of that same child. Alex had not only reclaimed his first-class seat, he had redesigned the entire plane. If this story has shown you how a single voice, even the youngest, can transform entire systems when it refuses to accept injustice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because true change comes not only from major events, but from ordinary people who, in critical moments, decide to stand up for what is right even when they stand alone.